Good morning, people. Good morning, good morning. It is 9 o'clock here where I sit in Burien, Washington, just south of Seattle, but north of Olympia, where our roastery is located. I feel like it's been forever since I've seen everybody here, although it's only been like less than a week. Thank you for tuning in this morning. I decided that today, what I wanted to do, I loved Ben's improv brewing yesterday. I had a different plan for what I was going to do today, but then when I watched him, it really was great to see experimentation with brewing coffee. I think so much time has been spent helping to educate customers and working on our craft, that we get locked into like these concrete ideas of what is the best way to brew coffee, what is the best coffee, what is the the guidelines that you have to hold on to, and we can get lost in those things really easily, right? And it's a little bit of a paradox, right? It's an if yes and situation. Should we have guidelines and recommendations for how to get the most out of the coffee that we're sourcing and roasting? Absolutely. There are certain things which we've just learned across time, being coffee professionals, right? That and it continues to evolve. But there's things we've learned, and we want to be able to share and teach those things. And at the same time, also know that there's a lot of room within that, and it really comes down to what you're enjoying in your cup of coffee in the morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you like to have coffee. So I loved Ben's video from the coffee workshop yesterday because he went all the way out there and just brewing with completely non-traditional things, just to start really having us focus on really fundamentals. Because with all of our tools and our toys, which we love, and we love talking about, as you can see from all of our videos, there are fundamentals that we're working with. And so I thought what I would do was kind of come back and talk about some of those things through a different type of brewing, which some of you may be familiar with. It is through the process of cupping. And now maybe if you have been to our roastery, you have seen this or participated in a cupping, or if you've gone back and looked at some of our videos, you'll see Bob doing cupping in his kitchen, and I've done some cuppings before, but it has been a while since we did like a focus or kind of a deeper dive in the cupping process. And I think it is a great way for us to discuss these elements of the kind of the foundational things around coffee, right? That we have fresh coffee, that we freshly roasted coffee that we've ground right before its use. We're using a ratio that makes sense, and then we're brewing it for the right amount of time. And so you'll see, just like Ben was talking about all of those things yesterday with his process using the paper cups, we're going to similarly talk about those fundamentals as we discuss this coffee here today. So what is the coffee that we're discussing today? It's going to be Sumatra Mandailing. We'll pop over onto our other screen here to take a look at it. So Sumatra Mandailing is obviously what we consider an Asia Pacific coffee. It's from there are the three broad areas where coffee comes from. Its origin, of course, in Africa. So we talk about African coffees, then Latin American coffees, and then coffees from the Asia Pacific part of the world, right? So we discussed that with history last week, knowing that the Dutch had brought what were ultimately African coffees to Indonesia, and to Java. So this is a Sumatran coffee. As always, I would recommend you pop over and look at the tab here, the coffee report, which Bob creates. It's not opening right up. That's fine. We'll come back to it another time. Where those coffee reports, what they attempt to do is discuss the coffee in more depth, talk about the actual producers of the coffee, and then also discuss its tasting notes in a little more in depth as well. But right off the bat, we'll just say that this coffee has a nice heavy body. That has to do with its it has to do with the type of coffee that it is. Has to do with the processing of the coffee as well, right? So our tasting notes from this are that it has cedar, truffle, spice, tobacco is sometimes considered, and you might be like, what, tobacco? That seems strange. But no, not in fact strange when we discuss the elements of tobacco we're looking for, which is that sweet, like kind of cured vegetative quality. So herbaceous is sometimes something we talk about with this coffee. But how do we determine that? How is that determined? Well, as you may know, cupping is a process that occurs in our industry, in the coffee industry, all along the life cycle of a coffee. From the farms where farmers are working with growing coffee, cultivating it, always improving their processes, and always checking in on their coffee to see how it tastes. They need to be able to taste the coffee not as the sweet cherry that comes off the tree, but they have to be able to pick some, clean it, process it, and then roast it, because that, of course, is the end point for the consumer, is the roasted coffee, right? So cupping goes on in origin countries for the producers themselves. The next point along the line in our industry where cupping occurs is actually at the point where we receive samples, where coffee roasters who are out looking to buy coffee will receive green coffee samples from farmers, and then Bob will go into the lab, and he or other members of the coffee team will take that coffee and they'll do a sample roast on it using a little small version of our big roaster, and they'll roast it and then they'll cup the coffee, right? And that's another point at which cupping is used. And that's the point where we're really, as someone who wants to purchase coffee, we're looking at the balance of acidity and body. We're obviously thinking about the aromatics of the coffee when it's been roasted and ground. We're thinking of the aromatics when it's wet. And then also, as we're slurping the coffee, which you'll all remember is so much fun, we're considering the flavors that appear on our palate, right? So that's a key place where coffee is cupped. Coffee is then cupped again if Bob likes the coffee and we choose to buy it. We'll make a contract for it. And then when it comes, because we've just received a sample at this point, when the coffee actually comes from origin, we'll then cup it again just to make sure that we are getting the coffee that we originally had tasted and that it's part of the process, to ensure that's what we like, and also to see maybe it has changed, because there's a period of time in that process when we get the samples, cup it and taste it, and then when we decide to buy it and then receive it, things can happen, right? And we have all sorts of crazy stories we can ask Bob about things that occur, environmental issues, about the way coffee is stored or way it's transported, that can actually damage the coffee. And so we have to make sure when we receive it into the warehouse that it's the same quality and literally the same coffee as we contracted. So that's another point when we do cupping, and doing for the same reasons, to judge its qualities in the cup. And then cupping, of course, it goes on as the coffee team develops the way we're going to roast the coffee. So those are some touch points for when we do cupping. Let's talk a little bit more about what the process is going to involve. So right off the bat, what you'll notice is I have three cups, right? Now, with cupping, one of the things we're attempting to do is to take what will ultimately be a really large amount of coffee when we purchase coffee in the bags, right? It's 100 pounds, and get a sense kind of statistically of where the coffee is. So if we were just to take one little batch of it out of that big bag and just taste that, well, it could be that, a certain percentage of that coffee in that bag is off, and we just didn't get the spot in the bag that had the coffee that was not, to quality. So we'll take samples from the green coffee. Well, when we roast it, of course, it all goes together to get roasted. But the goal is to try and have a wider sample than just one little cup of coffee. So in this case, we'll start with 3. So the idea is that, remember, there could just be one little bean that's in that, the coffee that throws off your cup of coffee when you brew it. So that one little bean could be in this cup, or it could be in this cup, or it could be in this cup. Our concern is whether it's in all 3, right? Because obviously, if we sense that there are big differences between these cups along a variety of measures, it's going to concern us about the integrity of that entire batch of coffee. So that's why we're going to start with 3. Now let's say we encountered an issue with one of these cups. At that point, then we would maybe blow up the cupping and have even more cups, right? Because it could be that maybe in that 100 pounds, literally there was one little coffee seed that got through. Or let's say 5. Let's say there's 5 coffee seeds, and we just happened to capture the one in this cup, right? I mean, it could happen, right? It's possible. Unlikely, but possible. And so if we notice a defect or an issue with the coffee, then they'll create more cups. We'll do 10, right? And again, we're trying to assess the evenness of the coffee across all those samples. So that's why we have multiple cups. It's not just because I want to drink more coffee. It's because we are attempting to get as wide a range for comparison in a big bag of coffee seeds. So that's why we have those 3. So let's talk about what we're going to do. What we're going to do is the first thing we do is we sniff the dry coffee, right? And this is just a process by which we can kind of to go through the qualities that we're experiencing. For me, right off the spice, and then a little bit of a vegetative quality. That's like a sweet vegetative quality is what I get from that right off the bat. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add water to the coffee, and then I'll have to stand up a little bit because I want to get right over the top of them for the next aromatic experience, which is one in which we smell the wet coffee, right? So let's get our water up to temperature here. If you have any questions about anything we're going through here, please ask in the comments down below. We have producers who are watching and can answer those questions if I don't see it, and I'll also call them out as well. Eric says Sumatra is on his menu today. That's awesome. Clearly it's on mine as well. And they're also posting some more information about the cupping process in there. So here we have water. I'm going to go ahead and start this time. All right. So you'll see right off the bat, you also get to take a look at how the coffee is reacting to the water. And that, when we do pour-over methods, when Brendan does them or Ben does them, we always talk about the bloom. Here's kind of a nice way to take a look at what's happening with that bloom. So you can see those bubbles appearing. That's the off-gassing of the coffee. That's the exchange of water for nitrogen there. And we want that to occur to expand the coffee, to make room between all those particles of ground coffee so they get saturated. And now I'm going to, and I can't quite get in here. Yeah, and that the spice quality is back again for me for sure. There's an element of spice in that coffee. One of the tasting notes we call out is cloves. You can totally experience that with this Sumatra. I have to tell you, I'm on kind of a Sumatra kick right now. My table is wobbling. Before I came to Backdoor 6 years ago, I had Sumatras and they were fine, but there wasn't really something I necessarily particularly enjoyed. They were okay. But when I got to Batdorf, I think just because of the care that goes into the cultivation of our relationships and this process of really choosing coffees that we feel are going to stand up, I had the first Sumatras that I actually really enjoyed. And often at this time of year, I kind of fall into a Sumatra kick. It's right in the springtime. Something about the flavor that I get from this Sumatra in particular, I just really enjoy at this time of year. I know as we move into spring and summer, we have, lots of African coffees coming online, and they're often traditionally used in cold brew or ambient brewing methods. And I love my African coffees also, but something about just this distinct culinary quality of the Sumatra. I mean, when I look at those tasting notes, it kind of calls it out. It's much more kind of savory coffee, really. I mean, it's something that really kind of goes with savory foods. I mean, the majority of foods I eat, and probably most of us eat, are actually savory foods. We love our desserts, right? But and for some reason, maybe it's just because I'm eating outside more often, and that quality of this coffee along with meals it speaks to me in the spring and summer. It's just me. We'll get down to the last few seconds of this. Now, this is, as you might have guessed, a full immersion brewing. Remember what Ben did yesterday with those cups? We have ground coffee, water goes onto it, and it just sits in solution here, right? Extracting qualities from the coffee. It's about 8 grams. Usually it's 8.25 grams for 5 or so fluid ounces of water in the cupping table. So it's a fairly heavy ratio, maybe a little bit heavier than we would usually traditionally have for brewing coffee. This is another key component. I'm going to do this. Let's get the bill out of the way. There, I look real super professional there. Now we crack the crust. And what this process is, we're going to do another big aromatic. And when we crack this crust that's developed here, all of this aromas are going to come out. We also, as we are attempting to isolate these coffees, we don't want to carry from one cup to the next any of the issues that we might have in any one cup of coffee. So between each one, we do wash off our spoon, right? So, yeah. Again, all those things. I will say that today, more often than usually, I am sensing like a bit of chocolate in there, chocolate or sweet, sweet chocolate. I would say for sure, not a cacao quality. All right. So after we've done our crack the crust, we're just going to scoop off the remnants of this. See all that lighter components up there, those non-water solubles, fats? We don't need those. You can get rid of those. We're really looking to taste and experience what has gone into the water, right? When you see espresso being poured, and that crema on the kind of thing there, it's just these fats that float on the top of the coffee. I mean, it's coffee as well. It's things that are in the coffee that, in the process of brewing, do not, of course, bond with the water. Right? Do not get there. Those components that don't pull down into the water. So we're just going to pull that all off. It also, you'll notice that when we crack that crust, what's happened is most of those grounds have now sunk to the bottom. Ben mentioned cowboy coffee, and I remember I did a cowboy coffee demo early on, gosh, about 2 months ago here. A lot of the same aspects of brewing occur with that, in which you just allow the grounds to settle. But the key thing is that they do have to settle, right? We don't want to keep them activated in the volume of the water, because that will lead to over extraction of the coffee. I'm gonna set this timer and think I'm gonna add about a minute to it in my mind. Now, usually we would wait for another 8 to 10 minutes as this coffee cools. I'm not going to wait quite that long today, out of respect of your time. We've already spent 21 minutes together, but I will look to see if there's any questions here. So, yes, the producers are definitely putting out there some of the tools you're seeing being used. And the first, of course, is our lovely Sumatra. I would love for you to try this coffee if you have not tried it. Please do consider getting that coffee. It is a fantastic representation of what Sumatra coffees can be. And like me, maybe you've had a Sumatra coffee before and it didn't really work for you. If you haven't tried ours, please do. So there's, of course, the Watch and Learn 10 coupon code for you to use. So please do make use of that. Go onto the website. We put a link in here. You can go and try this Sumatran coffee out. It's really a lovely coffee. And then go back into either Facebook or to our YouTube channel, and you can check out our demos for brewing coffee, or ask questions anytime. You can ask questions right here in these live broadcasts too. So we have the coffee. First fundamental, freshly roasted, right? When you order coffee from us, it gets roasted the next day and then sent to you. That's the way it works. We don't have big boxes of Sumatra just sitting there waiting for people to order it. We roast to order. Any reputable coffee company that you're getting your coffee from will be doing that. So just know that. Fresh coffee. Now, I've freshly ground the coffee as well. We always advocate for that. And so we'll put a link in for grinders, so you can consider getting a grinder for your home. And it allows you to choose the right grind size and to grind your coffee as you need it, which helps with its freshness. We put in a link for scales. I referenced the amount of coffee I was using here because there is a relationship between the amount of coffee, ground coffee, and the amount of water going onto that coffee. The water is saturating the coffee grounds, and there is a bonding of elements within the coffee to the water. The water is kind of pulling those things out of the coffee, right? But there's only so much that the water can do, first of all. There's only so much room in water, so if you don't use enough water, you will not fully extract everything within any particular piece of coffee, and for the batch of coffee as well. So the relationship to water and coffee is important. So I, in this case, weighed my coffee before I ground it. So I was using the right amount of coffee. And again, you can pop into our demos and we talk about that pretty consistently, about using the right amount of coffee. You can get there volumetrically, of course, but I have a video done about a month ago that talks about scales, volumes versus weights. And the reason why we do have a scale for sale is because, just like with baking, weighing your coffee is absolutely going to help you get that proportion correct when you're following a recipe. So here within cupping, of course, we have the right ratio that's being performed. Then we have water at the right temperature. So in this case, just off the boil, it's being added hot to directly to the ground coffee. That's why we list a hot water kettle, in our case, a variable temperature kettle that allows us to control the temperature of water being used. I keep referencing our videos. It's because we've been looking back over the last 3 months and realizing how many of these we've made. So I keep referencing them. Please go back and watch them. If you haven't, if there's any subject matter that you want, you can browse through and check those out. We did an interview a week ago or more with Jeffrey McIntosh about tea. And when we talked about tea, the importance of a variable temperature kettle absolutely came up. So if you are in a household where one person drinks coffee and another drinks tea, it's great to have a variable temperature kettle, because that allows your tea drinker to have water at the temperature they need it, and the coffee drinker to have water at the temperature they need it. And you might have seen when we've done demos on some of our roasts that have a higher component of darker or more fully developed coffees in them. With more fully developed coffees, some that are really developed, like our French roast or an Italian roast that we have, we are going to want to drop the temperature of our water down in order to really make that coffee shine, regardless of how you're brewing it. In a French press, in a Melita pour over, or in a Chemex or an AeroPress, we want to be able to control the temperature of the water to help those coffees out. So that's why we have, again, on our website, a Bonavita variable temperature kettle available for folks. So those links have been put in here for you. And remember, that discount code works for all of them, right? So 10% off of any of those purchases. So please, if you're thinking about taking another step in your coffee journey, take it with us. That's why we're making these videos, is so that we can reach out, have information out here that's really accessible, and then also to give opportunities like this that are live to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please do check in with us. So Joseph, absolutely. It's exactly right. Until I had Batdorf Sumatra, I was not a Sumatra. And there are lots of different probably reasons for that. And I never want to throw shade at other coffee producers or coffee purchasers. It's who knows. I mean, every different market has little nooks and crannies. It's big, the coffee world, and the agricultural world is big. And perhaps somebody got some coffee that just wasn't up to snuff, or maybe I got a bad bag, or who knows why. But I will just say that I think it's because of the level of detail and care that Bob and the whole coffee team puts into sourcing coffee and really choosing it very methodically that has made me a Sumatra person, because I really love this Sumatra. So Joseph, by all means, jump in there and get some of that coffee. All right, we're at 7 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and do the next thing here, which is, of course, the slurp, right? So it's been about 8 minutes. It's still a little hot. Now, one of the reasons we wait after we have, saturated the coffee, we've sniffed the dry coffee, we've put on water and sniffed it when it's wet, we've cracked the crust and sniffed it again. Remember, we're collecting all those aromatic experiences, which are so important in judging the quality of coffee. We're waiting now because after we've cracked the crust and those grounds have settled, it's kind of, in a sense, stopped brewing for the most part. However, the coffee's still really hot, and we want the coffee to be cooler so that when we go through this process of slurping, if the coffee's too hot, it will really affect your ability to gather sensorial experiences from it. That's just, if you drink something really hot, you can't taste it, right? As well as if it's a little bit cooler. Sometimes, if you go into like a diner and they have, subpar coffee, the way they hide that is they keep that coffee hot, right? Like those glass burners, just boiling away, and that way you don't taste what can be kind of the negative aspects of the coffee as much because it's so hot. Well, we want you to enjoy this coffee, and in this case, with this coffee, again, I talk about being a culinary coffee because of its more herbaceous and more like umami and um, those qualities of it really lend it towards being able to taste it completely. So letting it cool, and that holds whether you're doing a cupping here, in which we're really trying to, almost scientifically judge it, but also just when you're trying to just experience it, like along with a good meal, let your coffee brew, pour it in the cup, let it sit for a minute. No need to gulp it right down, even in the morning. I know it's hard. You want that coffee in the morning, just let it sit in the cup. I don't pre-warm my cup, for example, in the morning, because I want the heat of the freshly brewed coffee to kind of dissipate into the big ceramic mug a little bit and cool the coffee down a little bit, because I really want to enjoy it as a food, not just as my morning coffee. So anyway, I'm babbling. Let's taste this. Let's taste this coffee. Okay, so I'm gonna take some in the cup here, or in the spoon, and then you'll see me slurp the coffee. So why am I slurping? Kind of two reasons. Again, it further cools the coffee as it comes in, right? All the sucking and all that air with it, and spreading it out cools it as well. But then also in the spreading, it coats the inside of the mouth. And so you're really able to get all the different parts of your palate engaged in the tasting of the coffee. So sometimes when people are when Q graders are the people who are really determining like kind of the numerical value of the coffee on the scale to determine if it's specialty coffee, which is the only coffee we buy, nobody talks. Oh boy, we don't talk about the things we're experiencing as we're tasting it, or we don't frown, because you don't want to affect anybody else, because they're literally attempting to, what those graders come up with is going to determine the value of the coffee to a large extent in the marketplace. And then similarly, when the coffee team is going through a coffee, they may not, discuss it fully as they're tasting it until they're all done. Again, if I'm sitting here tasting this coffee, and right now you say, boy, I taste a lot of orange in here, it can absolutely affect what I begin to experience, right? So that takes a lot of work, and that's why the team that is responsible for this at Batdorf, it does so much cupping, because it takes practice and skill to locate those qualities. And the whole team at Batdorf, we come to cuppings on Wednesdays in order for everyone to practice those skills, to engage with cupping, because it is a learned skill, right? It's not a natural thing for us to taste foods this way, over and over again, repetitively. But as we cup, we begin to build up these little pathways in the mind that associate what we're experiencing on our palate with words and ways to describe it. Another reason that we spread the coffee across the palate when we're slurping, there used to be some understandings of the palate that kind of broke down different parts of the mouth for experiencing different qualities. Like in this area we taste bitter, in that area we taste salt. Could be. It's maybe a pretty broad generalization. So regardless, we want to be able to capture all the areas of each individual's palate that will help them experience the coffee fully. That's why we slurp it in, to get it all over the interior of the tongue and the sides of the mouth, and so that gustatory sense can kick in. And as well, as we're inhaling it in, I know we talk about aroma, but that's true too, because of course the passage up through the nasal cavity is in the back of the throat here. So as we slurp it in, we're also inhaling, and getting that last aromatic experience. Even though this last one on the palate is what we consider a gustatory sensorial experience, we're also adding a little bit of that olfactory experience as well. We want to really get our whole system saturated with it. So as I taste this coffee, again, we wouldn't necessarily do this on the cupping table unless it's a kind of a more kind of a friendly experience, right? We don't want to affect anybody's experience, but for sure I can get, there is the cedar is really pronounced for me today. And think of like when you, if you're about to grill and you have cedar and you have it in your hands and that resinous aroma of the cedar. Or if you've ever opened up, like the memory that comes to my mind is opening up an empty drawer that has cedar blocks in it, right? And that just that lovely cedar aroma that rises up out of that wooden box full of cedar, just that really nice quality. It's no wonder cedar is used as an incense, right? Yeah, and then I got sweet peas. That's just that's something I'm experiencing. So the great news about coffee, of course, is that you get to have these experiences yourself. So thank you so much for joining me today as we cup Sumatra Manteling. Please, if you have not tried it, go grab some. Use the link that we've included in the comments here. Make sure to use Watch and Learn 10 so that you can get 10% off. And if there are any of the tools that we discussed today, hey, consider it as well. You get 10% off of everything using that code. So by all means, you should consider that. I want to talk about tomorrow. So we have a new coffee that's going to launch next week. It is a Colombia. As you know, if you've watched our demos and our deeper dives, our green bean buyer is kind of a fan of Colombia. We are thus kinds of fans of Colombia, and we've had some amazing Colombians. And the Las Brisas has been the most recent one. I know Ben has been really infatuated with it. I think Brendan has too. It's a great coffee. We're bringing in a new Colombian this next week, and it is what is called a geisha. Now, tricky in the pronunciation, geisha. Geisha. I'm not saying geisha, I'm geisha. But I'm probably pronouncing it wrong anyways. Come and find out what's to do with the pronunciation. Why is the coffee called a geisha when it is coming from Latin American farms? Learn a little bit about the history of this type of coffee, this cultivar that we've been able to purchase before, not just from Colombia, but from other parts of Latin America. Why it is a type of coffee that at one point was getting the value of $300 a pound green, and what we think is really fantastic about it. Bob is going to cup the coffee tomorrow, and then Ryan Sue, who is our in-store trainer in Olympia, who works with training our retail staff with training and education, will be with us to talk about the coffee as well. And we're going to each brew the coffee a slightly different way. So that will be tomorrow at 9 a.m. joining Bob, Ryan, and myself here to discuss the new coffee being released next week. And then, of course, you'll see us talking about it next week as well. But this is just a little preview of this coffee coming up. We are going to work on having a call directly with our Colombian team that secured the coffee for us the week after, but still working on those details. So we want to talk more about this coffee next week when it's released. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really love being here in this space with you. I love tasting coffee with you, and I do look forward to joining you. But for now, spending time with you as we learn to turn our homes into cafes is enough for me. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.